All right. Well, I'd like to welcome you to the film festival. This is not what I normally do, but they thought it would be appropriate if I spoke to you. And I don't know, translate.
Okay.
um, um, we would like to thank you for your submission of this film to the Uşak Film Festival. That was the official welcoming. My name's Jano Dietrichson. I am Tlingit from Alaska. So the unofficial welcome is the traditional Tlingit greeting. So I watched the film a couple of times. It was quite interesting. My hairs on the back of my neck kept standing up on end, but that's just me. How seriously did these people take you?
They thought it was real.
They did.
Yeah. There was a couple of times where I was afraid. I shouldn't say afraid, but I got scared. But ultimately, is when we got stopped by the police. That's when I was like, "Shh, this could go crazy."
Yeah, I'm going to jail.
Well, I mean, like with the states, ever the hyper militarization of the police in the states, specifically after 9/11, it's just seen them getting worse and worse and worse with their treatment of peoples. And when you have brown or black skin, and not to say this doesn't happen to white people, because it does there, but our stories as black and brown people aren't often told, especially when we're dealing with assaults, murders, harassment from the police. So when they pulled up, I was like, okay, I'm gonna let the white people of our team talk to the police first before I say anything.
Yeah, I could imagine how that must have felt. The police have definitely wandered away from being a community member to something else, and we've seen that quite a bit, especially with this BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and after George Floyd and things. I mean, and yet the U.S. seems to still hold this shiny mythology that it's the best place on earth. I mean, even after all this thing, why do you think that would be? Especially here in Turkey.
I think I think people really love their country past their faults. Even when they're on the decline, even if when it's a really unhealthy relationship, there's certain family members that you have who might be lost in addiction, and you're like, oh, it's okay. He or she's just fine. They just had a bit too much alcohol, but they're really good people. They normally don't do stuff like this. I think that's the relationship that they have with themselves, not really admitting how far gone, if you how violent the right is getting, in this fictitious culture war that they have between one another, Democrats and liberals, or Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't really make much sense. But to keep that pride is pride is one of the last things to go, I find, with people. It doesn't matter how bad they get, they can still be proud of something. But yeah, I think they have this idea that they look down at the rest of the world, for not being as advanced, not having as much things as they do. The United States does influence the world, though. If you really think about it, there's so much that other cultures of the planet take from the States. But as the world begins to communicate, as information gets out there, their influence on the planet is starting to shake. These deeper truths that they can hide are coming out. And it's really messing them up. I find it's really messing them up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's all it has to do with just pride in who they are, whether or not they're at fault or whatever. They're still proud of their country.
So there was a couple of points in there that I don't think a lot of other people understand. One of the things you mentioned was in the movie was a colonial enforced poverty. What exactly did you mean by that?
The colonization of North America through genocide and the acts of genocide. I don't take that word lightly. And often people want these examples. So if you look in the States, the massacres that they had, every single president that you see that's on Mount Rushmore, they've all celebrated campaigns of genocide against Indigenous peoples. Every single one of them. The fact that Indigenous peoples were left out of the Constitution, we're savage Indians. We're not in the Constitution. The restrictive policies that came out of it, both in Canada and the United States. The United States is more upfront with their mass murder of Indigenous peoples. They used to raid camps when all the men were gone, and they would kill the women and the children and the elders. They would rape the women. They would cut out their specific sexual organs. They saw us as subhuman. They used to have bonfires, and they just burn little brown babies in these bonfires. And for them, it was nothing. They celebrated all these campaigns. They would look at it as another successful victory. Within Canada, they had this restrictive policy called the Indian Act, and it's still in today. We didn't sign to live on reservations. We signed to live on treaty lands. But the document that Canada has called the Indian Act, it takes away self-determination and puts enough roadblocks in to grow an economy to sustain ourselves. The Indian Act has created a dependency. It's not something we wanted. We wanted our treaty lands. We wanted to be able to evolve, to grow, to be who we are, in human history, just who we are and evolve like that. But the Indian Act is still there. It still determines who's Indigenous and who's not Indigenous. And it's like we're nations. We do nation to nation discussions in the beginning when Canada was being colonized. But right now, Canada determines and dictates through the Indian Act who is Indian or Indigenous and not. This is through the power of the Indian Act. This is legislation they pass through. So we don't have that ability to say that this person is Blackfoot. That comes from the actual Canadian government. It's a foreign entity to us. It's just like a neighboring country of Turkey saying, we're going to dictate to you who is Turkish and who's not Turkish. And here's the parameters, here's our decree, here's how we define what a Turkish person really is, rather than the country itself. Along with stunting our economy and crumbling it before it had a chance to evolve, they placed us into poverty. And then they placed legislative laws after legislative laws preventing us from growing. You can have individuals within the nation succeed, they can build stuff, but you can't have the nation itself rise up. Otherwise they would have. And so when I talk about colonial enforced poverty, the poverty that we have isn't one that we voluntarily joined up for. The poverty that we experience is through the policies of the colonizers, their legislative laws. Getting drinking water to one of the communities is a hard thing to do. It's an impossibility. Ramming a pipeline through and forcibly removing Indigenous peoples from their own homelands, their reservations, they can absolutely do, and they just did that in the Wet'suwet'en country. So just really quickly, Americans and the UK kind of have, every country kind of has this, but the Americans and UK are probably the most loud. If you don't like the country, leave it. They always say this to people who aren't there, go back to your country, go back to your country. With us, Indigenous folks, they just say, go back to the res.
Yeah.
You dirty Indian. And so you have all these folks who are like, okay, we're going to go back on the res. You have Kanahis Manuel, the Tiny House Warriors in southern BC-ish. And then you have the Wet'suwet'ens were kind of like north central BC. and they're protecting their lands. They're literally, they said, go back to the res. They went back to the res, and they're living on the land as best as they can, you know, and this hybrid model of like, what does sustainability look like in the 21st century, 22nd century? They're living as best as they can, protecting the land. So when I talk about colonial forced poverty, getting water to these communities, remote communities, is a hard thing to do. But when they want to push a pipeline through, it's there. They sent the police. They have no qualms about sending the military. For people who are living on the land, so you're saying we don't want a pipeline. This is where I'm living. This, like, right here is where I'm living. I don't want a pipeline that's coming through where I live. So they bring in the police. There's videos on YouTube of this, the police just kicking a door down, having their guns raised at people who are unarmed and they're at home. They kick the door down. They have a chainsaw. They have these tactical guys in their gear, forcibly removing Indigenous peoples from their homes. That's still happening today. It just happened the other week. And here's the most screwed up part. Some of these people had restrictions, and some of the restrictions are they can't go home. Like, think about that. They're living at their home, you know, living life as best as they can. The police kick in their door. They have no warrant. They forcibly remove them at gunpoint, arrest them. And then when they get released, there's conditions. You can't go home. Like, how screwed up is that? When I talk about colonial forced poverty, this is what I mean. When the government wants something to take from us, they'll take it. When it's acknowledging our self-determination, that is an impossibility. And it's layered. This thing just doesn't happen like this year. The Indian Act has been around since, I think, 1876. I believe it's 1876. And they had restrictive policies. They've had amendments, but ultimately, the main purpose of the Indian Act is to get rid of the Indians and to also remove self-determination and our sovereignty.
So in the States, I think one of the bills was to placate the natives by any means necessary. Mm-hmm. Was the term that was used.
I mean, if you look at all the shit that they wrote about Indigenous peoples in the States by the United States government, eradicate.
Yeah.
Like eradication. And they changed all of the wording after World War II. When they're kind of like reading the Hitler shit about the eradication and liquidation of the Jewish peoples. And then on their end, they're fighting for righteousness and freedom in their own documents. They talk about the eradication and liquidation of Indian people. And I think it was just like last year or the year before in Colorado, you could legally still kill an Indian. Like, that was in their laws.
Yeah.
And think about that. You could just shoot an Indian.
Missing and murdered Indigenous women movement that hasn't taken off as fully as I would like it to, but it also doesn't get very much recognition. And that's one of the things that kind of disturbs me is well, you and I would see all this stuff, and it gets us motivated and passionate about trying to get things to be changed. But it doesn't seem to be making the mainstream media, like the Standing Rock incident. You know, that didn't hit the news to my ears till a year after it happened. I mean, so with that being the case, it seems to be that the mainstream media is not, you know, covering these issues. Does entering the film festival like this seem to help gather traction for positive changes?
I think that, I think if you weren't aware, and if it shocks you and it kind of freaks you out and you kind of find it funny in this very tragic, fucked up way, then I think that it does kind of help. This has always been like my love letter to the frontline land defenders, because we really live in this bizarre, epic comic tragedy with development. And not to say that Indigenous, like, there's a thing that when the media puts out these press releases or the report, it's generally as Indigenous peoples are anti-development, where that story is so messed up because we don't control the resources on our lands. Like in Canada, reservation lands, Native people don't own that land. That land is held in trust by the Queen, and it's written within the Indian Act again. So we don't own the houses. We can rent the houses, but the land itself is something we don't own, which means that we can't borrow from the bank. It's not equity. It's hard to get loans from the bank to make your own house on the res. This is all through the Indian Act. So when we talk about like resource development, resource extraction, we don't really have a seat at the table as an Indigenous nation. We talk about like wealth sharing profits. We're not at the table at all. We get the crumbs. And we have been living in generational poverty since, the creation of the Indian Act, which was there to create poverty. So if you have starving people, and we are, and you offer them crumbs, people are going to sign up for that because they have nothing else. They have nothing else. There's like chiefs who say the only way to create an economy is through pipelines. Their idea and their imagination of like sustainability of development is so narrow-minded that it often destroys us. But like that idea of anti-development isn't really there. It'd be a lot different if we actually had a say. We had veto if we could talk about our lands and the best way to develop it. Most times when they talk about pipelines coming through Indigenous lands, we offer up alternative routes. And it's not like we're saying no pipelines at all. Some nations are like absolutely no pipelines. And you know what? That nation is totally allowed to say that. We have other nations that say, well, we don't really want to go this way. We prefer if you went this way. And the government and industry says, no, this is the way it's going through. And when we stand up against that, then you have the RCP coming through, you have threats, harassment, we have people being physically assaulted, we have death threats. Canahis Manuel is one of those people who like goes through the ringer constantly. And then again, they start pitting Indigenous folks against Indigenous folks, saying, you guys are in poverty, but these Wet'suwet'en people, they're stopping you from bringing home a check. They're stopping you from bringing home food on your table. And that's the mentality that they use against us. But the reality is what they're offering is nothing more than crumbs. That's it.
So a little bit of a clarifier. Maybe you'd be better explaining this. When you say Indigenous peoples and then you say nations, I don't think a whole lot of other people realize what this is, because I've been approached and asked if I could ride a horse because I'm Indian. And I have to tell them, well, I'm Tlingit. I'm from the Pacific Northwest coast. There's mountains and there's ocean. There's no space for a horse to drive. So no, I go hagu. I paddled my own canoe. Hagu. So if you could probably explain what you mean by, Indigenous peoples and then what you mean by nations.
You should just tell them to watch the cartoon Avatar and be like, my people, we didn't ride horses. We rode penguins. When we talk about, I think your starting point when trying to understand Indigenous peoples is that we're not tribal. We're not tribal peoples. I say this because it creates a deficit narrative in your mind, and it centers the conversation completely around Europe and what we call Eurocentric ideologies, where you look at the vastness of the European empire of, like Great Britain. They call it Great Britain because great is intimately tied to the conquest of the planet. They colonize the planet. But when you talk about nations, you say European nations, storied histories and all that jazz. But then when Europe began to colonize and invade every part of the planet, invade other Indigenous nations, the mindset they put into their people, which has been going on for centuries, is that they're tribes. And tribe generally means a simplistic view of the world. It's not as diverse or as complex or as unique or as beautiful as a nation. It becomes this outdated Victorian notion where like they're at the pinnacle, the very top of this like pyramid, and all these other Indigenous tribes fall to the wayside. They couldn't evolve to Europe, which is like this really, it's steeped in racism. Siksikaitsitapi, Blackfoot is what I am on my mom's side. And I can tell you that our system of belief is complex, but it was good. You know, like our governance structure and system is good and it's complex. We're not simple people. We had nation building practices. We have a storied and complex history. We're not simple people, but the idea of tribes, oh, this is my tribe, you know, this is my tribe. It's like, you don't, you know, so for us that don't know any better, we'll say tribe, but for us that do know a little bit better, who are deeply connected to our people and our history, we start seeing nations. When you start seeing nations and you can begin that route and you can let go of that terminology of like Indian tribes, you begin to understand nation to nation building. When the settlers came here, colonizers came here, and they were dying of scurvy and they needed help to live, they went to a nation, an indigenous nation, for help. These indigenous nations took pity on them and showed them how to live on the land. They showed them what medicines to gather, what to eat, all that jazz. They carried them throughout history. Tribes don't carry people. Tribes have nothing to offer because they're simple. But when it's nation to nation, your worldview begins to expand and grow. Because then you realize when you start going, and if you were lucky enough to travel to different parts of the planet, if you start seeing a nation, you start seeing people you can learn from and people who can guide you. But if they're a tribe, you're like, oh, they're just a simple tribe. They still worship the sun, or they don't know shit from food. You have to let go of that. So when we say indigenous nations, that's what I mean. We talk about diversity of nations. You're from the north. You're from the north, you know? Whereas on my dad's side, we're Dene, and we go all the way up. By my mom's side, we're Blackfoot, Siksikaitsitapi, and we're Buffalo people. So we were people of the plains, and we didn't get horses. We had horses way before there was a sickness that came through, and then we had horses reintroduced from the Europeans when they came here. We hunt buffalo on my mom's side, and on my dad's side, you know, we'd hunt moose, elk, we'd like fish, but two different ways of being, and they're diverse. That's another thing to let go of. There's diverse nations across North America, Central America, and South America. Different language families, different language groups. But the idea is to like stop looking at us as tribes and start looking at us as nations, because that's what we call ourselves.
So yeah, I can see that. When I say I'm Tlingit, the direct translation of Tlingit is human being. So I can understand. I just figured a lot of people have this pan-Indian, like we're all the same type of deal, and sometimes that kind of irks me, but then it has to go on to being a teacher instead of, you know, someone who dismisses, which is what I kind of enjoyed about this movie. It wasn't screaming or dismissive, you know. What's that saying? People won't hear someone screaming, but they'll crane their neck to listen to a whisper. And so I think that's how your humor works through this. Did this go over very well in the United States as far as the film is concerned?
For people who got it, they loved it. For people who were still in the denial of like racism, structural racism, who still fight against that, who quote like Brett Weinstein and Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and all those white justice warriors, like they refuse to get it. They refuse to see that there's a, you know, that there is this other call to action, that there is this other reality, you know? And those people were like the most vocal and toxic, and they just hated it. You know, and it's funny. It's to me, it's funny to make something like this and to put it out there and not say anything about it. It's just let people kind of do their own thing, interpret it their own way is great, because there's overwhelming support. There's overwhelming support from people of the town we went to. like, because that area that we went to, we had people coming in and saying they were from there and they loved it. And it's generally people who are outside of that community and that were like American or Canadian that are pro oil that hated what we had to talk about and what we brought forth. And they were, like I said, like they were just toxic. Some of them were just like threats and stuff. But the one thing I want to talk about was really quickly is when we talk about the Pan-Indian, the idea that we're all tall and we hunt and we can like trap and we live out in the land. It's like that's this aspect of us that's true. And it's funny too, because like I do hunt, I do track, I do spend a lot of time out in the land. And it's like, God damn it, I'm actually living that stereotype. But the other side is that we're still Indigenous no matter what we do. You know, we're Indigenous if we're friggin' playing video games. You're an Indigenous person playing video games. It doesn't make you any less Indigenous. Everything that we do as Indigenous peoples makes us Indigenous. You know, whether or not we fit their check boxes doesn't matter, because we're not people that are stuck or lost in history. We're still evolving. We're still creating art. We're still making art. We're still expanding on our Indigenous philosophies that were given to us by our ancestors. We're still, recapturing all of that knowledge. We're interpreting it, and we are who we are. But it's funny, yeah, that idea of Pan-Indians, because they expect a big tall Indian, and I am a big tall Blackfoot. It's funny.
Yeah, I'm not that big or tall. I am native though, so.
Northern people aren't that. They're not known for their height. Fierce. I'll say fierce, but not really known for their height.
We have two types of Tlingit in our culture, as far as body types are concerned. We have the long-legged, skinny type, which is me, and then we have the short, squat, barrel-chested, big-armed tanks. But it's true. We have people who seem to sit in the canoe all day and paddle up and down the Pacific Northwest coast. And then we have the ones that have long enough legs to climb over the top of the mountains to trade our oils. So, and furs and fish and other things. I'm kind of curious. What did you mean by trickster? Because I have my own. I don't have a whole lot of Pan-Indian trickster. I know that every culture has one, like the Vikings is probably the most famous in the world of being Loki now that Marvel's come out, but I would like to hear what your trickster is.
Our trickster, well, the term trickster is a little limiting.
Yeah.
Our teacher would have been Napi, and but this is the thing, is that there are the mythical, legendary, characters that we have that are written into our history, written into the land, because their stories come from the land. And then we have the people who teach you in your generation, in your parents' generation, your grandparents' generation, who are kind of foolhardy, that often take that route of like the hardest route to learn, and making themselves an example. So like that term, it's very, very limiting. If we're talking about who our stories are written of and about, ours would be Napi. And he came in the form of a young, foolish person, or he came in as a wise elder. And the route for him learning, this is like, now we're getting into stories. The route for him learning, at the end of the story, he may or may not have learned his lesson. But you, as the person sitting and listening, were then given that story to learn from. And so hopefully when you're told the story over and over again, you learn something from it. But then you're going to come to a crossroads in your life where you come to a very similar situation. And then you have to remember that story, or you become that story. And then people learn from you. But ours was Napi, and he could shapeshift. He does really crazy things, and he gets people to do crazy things as well. And I always had to go back to that in my mind. Like, if we're going to learn, these people that we're coming across might not learn. And you don't learn myself by like validating what I already think I know. Like that's you can kind of get lost in ego with that, and often a lot of people do. But the process for this was always, I had to go back to it, was the viewer, and our stories were like that. The person listening, the person viewing the story, and so that's where my focus would go. However crazy things got, and I did actually want to get things a lot crazier, but we had budgetary restrictions. And also, like, we were just kind of testing the waters with this. But that was it in the end. The person watching this, however they're going to consume it and take it, that was the main focus. And hopefully that they learn. Hopefully they come out of this understanding a bit more about Indigenous peoples. And also the juxtaposition of, like, when it happens to Indigenous folks or when it happens to these white Americans.
So how did you actually manage to get away with this? I mean, without any serious repercussions. I mean,
there's like there's like satire, like theater and satire is a thing you can play with in the States to a certain extent. Once you get some cease and desist letters, you have to kind of stop. But there's a whole realm of like make-believe theater that you can do and play in. And like Borat, or Sacha Baron Cohen does with Borat. There's a really brilliant series by Eric, that just a show that came out on Netflix where they kind of go across the States and they set up these like practical jokes. I called it like augmenting reality. You know, that's what I look at, is you can augment reality for people. And the beauty is like letting them know or not letting them know that what happened was fake. So some people, they kind of caught on, and some people didn't. And I was like, you know what? We don't have to tell them. We just let them live this idea out. But yeah, you can play with certain stuff in the States. I don't know about other countries. I definitely wouldn't try. Ones that are a little more restrictive, I definitely wouldn't want to mess around with.
So again, I'd like to thank you. I think our time is pretty much up, but I appreciate talking to you. It's been here since the pandemic, so it's kind of interesting to talk again with somebody of the same kind of language aspects that I have. So
always good to see another brown skin.
Yeah. I have to give you my reaction though.
I love to hear it.
My reaction is your movie made me mad. It really upset me. You know, having to see all this stuff that's going on, and it's not because of your movie. It's because I also live inside of this enforced poverty, and I also have to deal with this how do you say, blind racist mentality, right? It's okay if we do it to you, but don't do it to us, especially on a Sunday when we just had a quiet service, right? So, you know, that's the reason why your movie made me upset. Is not because I'm looking from the outside, you know, going, oh, what a pity. I'm actually had to deal with this stuff, and we're continually deal with this stuff, you know, on a daily basis for as long as I lived in Alaska. So, you know, but that's why it made me upset, and not for any other reason. I found it, you know, quite humorous. I got it because, you know, that's just, I don't know. It's this kind of evolution of language that it seems that Native people speak a different English than the rest of the world, right? So just, it brought up a lot of childhood memories watching these people react the way they did. And so, but But other than that, the film was great. It got underneath my skin because I'm on the inside looking out, whereas other people were on the outside looking in who might enjoy this film. So,
what was so the screenings you had? What was some of the reactions from the Turkish people?
Well, I haven't actually sat in a crowd with anybody. It was just my wife and I who sat here and watched it. What do I say about your reaction?
Yeah,
I felt very similar.
Yeah, she was quite disgusted with the cemetery people and angry. But
religion is, I mean, if you're religious, that also proved to me again that religion is
yeah,
everything happens.
The colonialism in the name of religion is what brings to her mind, what the priests have done, what religion has done, the boarding schools, those sort of things is what she came up. But she also lived in Alaska for 6 years, and so she has a clearer picture of what's going on. So, but in general, people in Turkey, people across Europe, I mean, we're the invisible ones. We don't exist except in museums, and from what I've gotten, thank God there's museums, or there wouldn't be anything about Indians left. So, having to hear those sorts of things just kind of upsets me as well. So, but
you're like right there as these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
You wouldn't exist if these museums weren't here.
Yes, exactly. Right. And it's just,
I think we have a museum downtown Calgary, and they have showings every now and then. And I went there once because they had some stuff from Central America. And so you had these people, I think we had 10 or 12 at a time could go. You go behind the scenes of the museum, and you had about 10 or 12 people who knew a lot of stuff about the architecture in Central America, which is great. Same people that know jack shit about, the indigenous folks that lived in the area forever. They've been here for multiple generations, these Canadians. But to know about the people who live down the street, to know about their architecture, their governance system, their language, their art, everything, they had no idea. They still think that, a lot of them still thought pan-Indianism. And that's one of those cognitive things that are just disconnected from their minds, and it's really bridging that gap of understanding, which is seeing us as nations, facing some uncomfortable truths, and really just kind of growing. Just it's being okay with saying, I don't know. I don't really know anything about Native people. Let me learn,
Yeah. So, I mean, I get a lot of questions about Natives as well. And it's I don't know. I'm Tlingit. How am I supposed to know, what another nation does or what they believe in? Our nearest neighbors, the Haida and Tsimshian, for Alaska, Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian there, we don't even speak the same language. And so, our artwork is similar because we traded. Our stories are similar because we traded. But
are you saying they're similar as in there's some Lebanese cuisine that's kind of familiar to Greek cuisine? Because there might have been some trading between these two nations? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying that there's Roman art that looks very similar to Greek art because they were neighbors and they were trading? Is that what you're saying? This is blowing my mind, man.
Pretty much, but the context is completely different. It is, I went, I was supposed to be the native guide on a tour ship, and we go throughout Southeast Alaska visiting other places. And as a Tlingit, we're supposed to go we come into the door and we sit by the door. That's our spot. And I come to a dance group in their traditional longhouse, and I sit by the door. And evidently, I did a very bad thing. The house looks the same, but the protocols are completely different. What I did was quite very rude. So, because that's their spot to do their presentation and things. So, but
I was hanging out with my Mohawk friends, and I got to go into ceremony in their big house. You know, there's like, and they have clans, and they have a big house. You know, there's like, or a long house, but they call it a big house. And some of the clan stuff translates. So if there was like, there's no Raven clan, but if there was a Raven clan with the Mohawk people, and there was a Raven clan, there's multiple different societies that have clans, they would consider themselves cousins, and they couldn't marry, even though they're not related by like blood or any kind of genealogy. Just because they share the same clan, they couldn't get married. Anyways, I go to the ceremony. I had to, like, everyone was going in. I had to grab something from the car. So I go to the car and get something, and I walk, and there's two doors. There's like a door on the right and there's a door on the left, and they're at the opposite ends. I'm thinking, and I see some people walking in the other door. So I walk in. I walk in through the left side of the door, or I guess it'd be like the east or whatever. Anyways, I walk through, or the west, and everybody, all these women, they kind of look at me and they kind of start giggling and they kind of start laughing and kind of start talking to one another. And they know I'm not from there. And eventually one of my friends, who's a female, jumps up and she's like, "You just came through the girl door. You need to go through the other door." And then I kind of like put my hands up, and then like everybody was kind of laughing. And then as I came to the other door, my other friends who were in the male side started just kind of laughing as soon as I walked through. And then but at the same time, they're like, "You know, if you want to come through that door, we're not going to judge you."
Yeah. So just start walking in a circle all the way through. So yeah.
I'll use this video to show that you can laugh and smile.
Oi. She's going to use this video to say that I can laugh and smile. Most people see me as this.
Yeah, stoic Indians. Stoic Indians. You know why? I have a theory on why we didn't smile in any of those old photos. Because we, like, Blackfoot people, Six of Gates to people, we laugh. We like to joke around. A lot of us nations do that. We have ceremony, and even in ceremony, we're still kind of joking around. There's business time.
Yeah.
But then there's like, outside of that, you can laugh, you can joke, you can, you know, bring up stories. Funerals and wakes, when we have them, like there's certain moments where we're just pissing ourselves laughing, making those inappropriate jokes, but we're still all together and we're laughing. But my theory is, when you look at those old photos, those black and white photos, and you see natives like this,
Exposure.
it's because in order to take those old photos, that you had to hold your position for longer than a minute, depending on the camera. Then the older the photos are, the longer you had to hold the position, because they had to burn the image into the camera, and it wasn't just like a quick thing. So instead of us grinning like idiots for 2 minutes, we're like, I'm not going to smile. I'm just going to, you want my photo? This is how I'm going to look. Like, if I have to sit here for 2 minutes and not move, this is it.
Yeah, but I mean, you would have to be completely insane to hold a grin for 2 minutes. Can you imagine? I mean, you can laugh, but then you're moving and the photo won't come out, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be something seriously wrong up here in order for you to sit there and smile for 2 minutes. I mean, it's just, to me, that's just creepy. My theory on why people, our nation's people didn't smile in the photos, more often than not, they were paid. You know, it became a tourist thing, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're throwing a penny, you're not going to be smiling either. You know, what is this? Where's the $5, man? Come on.
Or they have like, we'll give you $1 and this blanket, which may or may not have diseases, and we're like,
I'll take the $1, you keep the blanket.
This is my thinking face, and I'm going to take that blanket.
Oh man. So
Well, hey, whenever the pandemic lifts and you come back, if you're going to come back, just come. You can come to Calgary. Well, we'll put you up at my place. You and your wife. Anytime in the future, if you're ever coming back, you have a place to come crash in Calgary.
Yeah, same for you if you come to Turkey. I'm headed off to Juneau, Alaska here wow. in April. That's my hometown. Yeah, because every 2 years they have a thing called Celebration, and it started in the 80s, and it's basically all the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian natives gather for 3 days to sing and dance, tell stories, food contests, and things like that. So
I'm going. I'm just going to invite myself.
Yeah, it's exactly what everybody else does. I had this redneck friend. He was a racist. He was still a friend, but he was still, one of those guys. You actually know what he was thinking. He was always honest with you. Complete white guy, big white guy, right? He attended the celebration, right? I got him to come down there, and he started walking around, and there's 500 singers, 300 drummers, natives everywhere, and he was starting to get nervous. His hands are shaking at things. He says, "Damn, I feel intimidated." This is how we feel all the time. So yeah, it's definitely an event to attend to. It's a great thing. It's every 2 years in Juneau. The last one didn't happen because it was the start of the pandemic. But this year they're going to go through with it. And so if you show up, it's in the first week of June, 5th through 8th, I think. I'm not quite sure, but it's put on by Sea Alaska. And so if you visit their website, seaalaska.com, you should be able to navigate somewhere and figure out what the dates are exactly.
Okay. I just want to give a shout out really quickly. If you're from Turkey and you want to come check out one of the most beautiful places in Canada, I have to give a shout out to the Haida, because that place, Haida Gwaii, that place is amazing. It's literally like heaven on earth. And if you're going to go to Haida, if they open their island up, and you're allowed to go, I would recommend going to that place, because it's, there's no other place on the planet like it. Their culture, the language, the people, some of the most beautiful people on the planet are in Haida Gwaii. Because I'm from the plains, and this is we call this God's country because it's really beautiful, but you kind of get a little jealous of what they have out in Haida, and what they're willing to do to protect it. So yeah, I would recommend that. Go check out Haida.
We're just a little bit north of that, so I know what you're talking about. So
you get a little taste. You get a little taste of the Haida.
Oh no,
it is though.
We're above them. You thought that was heaven on earth. We're in heaven. Yeah, but there's always a friendly rivalry with the Haidas and the Tlingit. One of the old-timey jokes is you'll never find a Tlingit in a Haida bed. Horrible, horrible, horrible joke. Sorry you had to hear it.
Well, I'll definitely try to check it out. I've always wanted to head up there. I have a few friends in Alaska, so I'd always want to go check it out. Yeah,
it's a great event. Like I said, it's always on the even year. So, don't show up in 23 and think, what happened? Did they cancel? Mm-hmm. So it's every 2 years on the even year.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, thanks for putting up with my interrogation.
No, it's fine, man. I love it.
So,
it's a trip to know that I helped to have created something, and it's there on your part of the planet.
Yeah.
And people are seeing it on that side of the world. So it's quite a trip actually to hear that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I hope it gets a little bit more exposure through this event for you. So,
thank you.
we'll keep in touch, or at least the film festival will let you know what's going on. All right, we'll talk to you later.
Ciao.